everyone, and welcome back to the Unreal channel. With the release of Unreal Engine 5.8, one feature that really caught my eye is fog screen space scattering. I was curious to see how it would affect the atmosphere of the scene, so I created a small environment to test it out. Let's jump in and take a look. Let's start with a quick breakdown of how I create this environment. For the church model, I use an asset from Scan Factory. I will leave a link to it in the description below. For the road setup, I already covered the process in a previous video using PCG. You can find the link in the top right corner of the screen. It's actually very simple setup and a great way to create roads quickly. Now let's move on to the PCG garage setup and see how I populate the environment with vegetation. Here I'm starting with a simple spline, and the entire setup contains within a blueprint, including the PCG graph. As you can see, the loads I'm using here are actually very simple. The main thing to look at here is the static mesh spawner. I took a few settings to make the setup a bit lighter and improve performance. I have set the wall position offset distance to 2000. This way only the grass near the camera receives the wind animation, while the grass filter away remains static. Next, I set the instant and cold distance to 5000. The main reason is that I don't want to spawn grass too far away from the camera, since it doesn't contribute much visually and can be quite inefficient. Finally, I have only enabled radiating on a single grass type. This helps reduce the overall cost while still preserving the visual quality of the scene. To make the vegetation feel a bit more natural, I also add some hand-painted foliage on top of the PCG setup. I also added a few props from Fab to give the scene more detail. For the distant terrain, I use a few simple ground meshes and scale them up, and they still look quite natural in the final shot. For the fence, I use an asset from Fab. You can find the link in the description below. And that's it for the first part of this video. In the next part, I will show you how I set up the lighting and atmosphere to achieve this overcast look, so stay tuned. Now I'm going to start from scratch and walk you through the entire setup process step by step. First, let's lock the exposure input process volume. I will set up both the min EV and max EV to 1, just like you can see on screen. Now let's start building the lighting setup for this environment. Alright, let's start with a directional light. You can follow along and use setting I'm using here. Okay, good. And intensity section, set it to 5 or 4. Because this is an overcast scene, I'm keeping the sunlight fairly subtle. For the skylight, I recommend using an HDRI to achieve more natural lighting. You can follow along and see how I'm setting up. I've already made a detailed video on how to customize this HDRI materials, so I will leave a link for anyone interested. I will also include the sample project so you can try it. And you can see the setup I'm using on screen right now. It's a simple way to create natural lighting. Yeah. For the skylight color, I'm shifting it slightly towards a color blue tone to better match the overcast mood. And intensity scale, set it to 0.8. For the fog setup, you can follow the settings I'm using on screen. I'm mainly adjusting the fog density and the fog color, then enabling volumetric fog to add more depth and atmosphere to the scene. I'm setting the volumetric fog view distance to 60,000 to keep most of fog in the background. You can adjust a bit to make better. I think it already looking pretty good. You can also tweak the sky atmosphere settings a bit to make the scene feel colder and more overcast. Just follow along with the values I'm using on screen. I'm going back to the fog settings, making a few adjustments to better match the look I'm after. Feel free to use my setting as the reference. I think it's still a little too bright, so let's darken it slightly. So far it's looking pretty good, but we are not quite done that. Let's make a few more adjustments. I have added a few extra lights here to give the scene a bit more contrast. I'm using easy fog in the distance to help separate the focal point from the background and create more depth in the scene. I'm also adding some local fog in the foreground to help create more depth and make the scene feel more dynamic. Local fog is already included in Unreal Engine 5.8, so you can simply add it into the scene like I'm doing on screen. Now it's time for the main event. Let's enable fog screen space scattering and see what kind of results we get. As you can see on screen, the fog cloud looks much smoother and more natural, and it has a stronger sense of realism compared to the original results, which is really impressive. Feel free to experiment with the settings available here. We have amount scale, amount power, and blur control. I think this is a really great feature, and hopefully it will make it into the final release of Unreal Engine 5.8. If it does, that would be awesome. Alright, that pretty much wraps everything up. As you can see on screen, this overcast environment combined with fog and the new fog screen space scattering feature produce a really light result. The atmosphere feels smoother, more natural, and overall much more cinematic. And that's it for today's video. If you did, consider leaving a like and subscribing for more Unreal Engine content. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.